Archives of Prasar Bharati presents the timeless treasure of golden era.
Hello and welcome to the fourth in our ongoing series of roundtable discussions on the bureaucracy and administration. This week we consider the people's right to information. Joining me in the studio, Major General Ashok Mehta, Defense Editor of Sunday Magazine. Also with us in the studio, Mr. K.M. Chadda, a Joint Secretary in the Department of Agriculture and Cooperation. Joining us in the studio for the first time is the man who set off this series of programs on administrative reforms. Mr. K.S.A. Sundaran is an Additional Secretary in the Department of Administrative Reforms. And with us in the studio, one of the mainstays of Roundtable since its inception, Marwah, former police commissioner, former various things, one of the most distinguished IPS officers of his time, and perhaps of any other time. Let me start with you, Mr. Sundaran. Why is the right to information so important?
We consider the right to information as an important component of responsive administration, because over the years the people have got alienated from the various government functionaries and vice versa, partly because of the cocoon of secrecy around which all the official transactions have surrounded themselves. So we think, to the extent that the government wants to reach out to the people, one important way it can reach out is by making all its transactions transparent, by giving the public more information about what it is doing and enabling the people to understand the working of the government. In this process, we think the functionaries also can become more empathetic to the people.
Ashok, is the Official Secrets Act one of the problems?
Well, it is not merely the Official Secrets Act. Within the army, there are, or in fact within the armed forces, there are so many other rules and regulations that have been superimposed. For example, there is something called Army Rule 21. There is something called Army Order 15S of 81. And on top of that sits this National Security Act. So I would rather say that it is not the right to information, to seek information. As far as the armed forces are concerned, it's right to give information. They want to give information that they are not being allowed to.
Really? Give me an instance, the kind of information they'd like to give.
For example, there are so many barriers which have been imposed for formations and units which are out in routine operations to give information about what is actually happening. Now let me give you an example. Very recently, the Defense Secretary, for the first time ever, met the press. In 1994, the media was, the South Bloc was out of bounds for the media. Now when he did this was seen as some kind of glasnost. When the army and the services tried to do likewise, there was a clampdown. They wanted to brief the press routinely about operations that are taking place in the northeast and in J&K, and they weren't allowed to do so. So what does happen? The media has to put out stories, so you get a great amount of distortions in those stories that appear because of the various levels of the barriers that have been imposed, if I might use that word.
And yet there's nothing the army can do about it.
No, there's nothing they can do about it.
Which is an unhappy situation by any reckoning.
Absolutely.
Ved, does the police face the same problem?
Well, as General Mehta has said about the Official Secrets Act, the Official Secrets Act came into existence because of security and sovereignty of the country in 1923. Unfortunately, the way it has been interpreted, it has given some sort of a defense mechanism for various government officials not to share information. Let me give an example of a type of information which is sometimes withheld because they say that what can we do, it is secret and it is concerned with the Official Secrets Act. Regarding tenders, now naturally if there is something hanky-panky has taken place, the official concerns are not willing to share that information with the people because the whole chain of reaction will follow. And they will take this excuse that it is Official Secrets Act. But if you really look into how many officers have been prosecuted under the Official Secrets Act since 1923, very rarely. And another important point is that how is it that a lot of officers, when they retire, they come out with all sorts of books, they come out with all sorts of information, They are still under the Official Secrets Act, but nobody has ever been prosecuted. The point which I am
Let's take your own book. You've written in great detail about what happened in the Northeast, what happened during Operation Black Thunder. Would that be a contravention?
Yeah, that's why the point where I'm trying to make is that keeping away information from public which could adversely affect the interests of the country, and that has to be with security and sovereignty, something very basic. Now yes, that sort of information should be withheld, but that also should be released after a time, because after all it contributes to an assessment of how policy decisions were taken at that particular time. It is done even in the United States. There is a period for 30 years or something like that.
A cooling off period.
A cooling off period when all information is given. Unfortunately, in our country, the officials themselves don't want to share that information, and they take pretext of this Official Secrets Act, because otherwise how is it that all sorts of information is coming and nobody has, I am not aware of any case of any official being prosecuted under the Official Secrets Act in the last many years.
Is there a mechanism? For instance, when you wrote your book, was there somebody you showed it to in the government who says, okay, go ahead, you can print all this? Or did you just have to use your own discussion?
No, there is no requirement of getting.
No, but you have just use your own discussion.
If I were in government service, yes, I would have to show it to my department to get a clearance that what is being revealed does not adversely affect country's security interest. But after after I've retired, the Official Secrets Act is still applicable to me as much as it is to a serving government official. But the change is that now the discretion is entirely mine. But that discretion doesn't change the legal liability.
Right.
But very interestingly, therefore, every book that is written by a soldier, sailor, or an airman, or a policeman, in the preface of that book, he will write that I am not using any information that I got while I was in service.
Then why bother to write the book? Well, if he's not going to use the information he got while he was in
what he
service.
actually means is that he's not using actual documents.
Okay. Which are the ones covered by the Official Secrets Act?
That's right. Okay. So he clarifies his position at the outset.
In the event of prosecution, this might be useful. Okay. Mr. Chadda, what is your experience?
So, I come from a state which is in the extreme northeast corner in Nagaland. In Nagaland, we don't have a feudal society. So, there is free access by the public to the officers. So, normally the officers are very responsive to the public and they share the information which is available with them. But simultaneously, there is a problem of insurgency in the northeast region. So, there is some type of information which we have to keep with ourselves, especially about people who are giving information to the intelligence agencies and others. So, that type of information certainly cannot be divulged. But in the overall, I think, while agreeing with the fact that there is a need for right to information, there are some items like defense, security, international relations. These are activities which naturally we have to keep to ourselves. And also, there are some things like in the process of legal proceedings or judicial inquiries, some information which may have to be kept up the sleeve to be used, maybe divulged later on, but at that point of time it may not be possible to divulge that.
Why not?
See, then it may hamper the inquiry process as such, and the inquiry may not be able to fulfill the target for which it was set. But my only point is that even many inquiries which we have actually got over the years after the independence, many of them have not even seen the light of the day. At least public is not aware of what transpired in those and what were the findings. So, it may be better if not the complete, at least some sort of information could be given to the public, if at least for the future what exactly should be done in future to avoid such incidents.
That would seem to make sense. Mr. Sundaran, where does all this leave us? There seems to be a general agreement that the Official Secrets Act is too wide-ranging. Would you accept that?
Yes, it is too wide-ranging. In fact, I would try to slightly amplify what Mr. Marwah has said. The Official Secrets Act, the way it stands today, it says any document that comes into the possession of a person in the course of his official dealings, any document, and that becomes an official document for the purpose of the Official Secrets Act. And both the person who deals with it as well as the person who receives it, both of them become guilty of an offence if it is communicated to a person who is not authorized to receive that communication. And not only the official, but also anybody who is in the contract of government, even a contractor who gets hold of a document, maybe a tender document, whatever, which is so classified. And the villain of the piece is the classification. We got a rule called classification, and it is left sometimes to a section officer to classify a document as confidential.
For the benefit of our viewers, what is a section officer?
A section officer is a functionary, you can say, that who usually heads a section. A ministry is divided into a number of sections and is headed by a section officer. And you can say he is maybe the first tier in the you can say the lower middle executive of the government. Now he is competent to classify a document. The second villain of the piece is what's called the code of conduct rules. Now one particular rule says that no official shall communicate to anyone information which he is not authorized to receive. Now it is left to the official to decide whether that particular information is confidential or whether he can receive it. Now this resulted in a peculiar situation where in Rajasthan details of development expenditure were sometimes considered by collectors and lower functionaries as information which they cannot communicate to the public, whereas anyone would say when the public has a right, when a budget has been passed by a legislature, how much has been spent, where, and to what extent assets have really been created, that is a matter of public knowledge. In fact, it was found when the Rajasthan government issued one of a very well intentioned order to make this public. They found that schools that were supposed to have been constructed were never constructed at all, and they found so much evidence of leakage and corruption because all these details were kept secret. The people did not know about it. So it became a kind of a movement in Rajasthan. That right to information ultimately becomes a right to ensure that in fact people get value for money and the government expenditure.
It's a right to accountability.
Right, it becomes a part of accountability.
What can be done about the Official Secrets Act?
Now what we are trying to do is, we have already there is a considerable amount of you can say internal documentation on Official Secrets Act and freedom of information in different countries. So we have constituted a working group to draft.
By we you mean your department?
I should say the government.
Okay.
In my department, but actually the government, as you can say, this was reflected in the manifesto of the common minimum program. In fact, this is right to information is something that features in the manifestos of almost all all the parties who fought the election in 1996. And so this group has been constituted under the chairmanship of an eminent consumer activist, Mr. H.T. Shauri. And then we've got legal luminaries like Soli Sorabji, and so people like that. So the idea is, number one, to work out a draft of a Freedom of Information Act, and also to work out amendments to the Official Secrets Act, particularly the sections which give it a catch-all character.
Is there a timetable for this?
Our timetable is to try and make a legislation available to the government for introduction in the parliament over the next 4 or 5 months. And
that soon?
Yes, because basically there is a draft of a bill available given to us by the press council. So a lot of work has been done by people, because even in 1990 the VP Singh government had initiated exercises on this.
Okay.
For some reason it fell by the wayside. So again it has been revived, and so legislation is available.
Can I ask you to comment on the general's point, which is that even when the IAS decides to talk about issues, the Defence Secretary will talk about things, but the army is prevented from doing so. Is that fair?
I should think that once an information is deemed to be made available to the people,
it shouldn't matter who's giving it.
It shouldn't matter who is giving it.
You'd agree with that, Ashok?
No, I don't agree with that.
Why? Explain that.
The question is that the armed forces are a very large organization, and surely that the armed forces themselves must be responsible for projecting their image and the work they do in the manner they wish to do. Now what is happening is that everything has to be funneled through what is known as the Defence Public Relations, which is a part of the ministry. It's a civilian, essentially a civilian organization, and I regret to say that they are not conversant with the ways and the means of the armed forces. So what you actually get is a half-baked picture. And why shouldn't the armed forces be allowed? Surely they are as responsible as the police chief K.S.A. Gill or Mr. Session. Mr. Session could talk about the future of this country. Mr. K.P.S. Gill extrapolated on everything on earth, and when General Rodrigues spoke about good governance, he was taken to task and he was made to apologize. So why treat the armed forces as kindergarten kids? Surely they are entitled to the same kind of liberties. They are responsible people, and they would then form their own organization to project the image. One of the main cribs of the armed forces today is that they are not getting a fair and a good press, and the reason is that they are unable to communicate with the press.
Obviously, any reference to KPS Gill, I have to turn to you, but what about the claim that the police can talk about anything and the army can't?
I don't know. I don't think I'm not aware of any rule that the army can't.
Is there a rule?
No, you see, that's what I'm trying to say. Once you have decided that a particular information is not confidential, and you have a rule about revealing it and things like that, and so long, and it is for the army to then nominate a spokesman who will make available all this information, and there is no rule which says that they cannot divulge it and it can be divulged only by a particular person. There is a rule about what's called a spokesman.
What is the rule?
The rule is that in respect of various departmental dealings, they are basically, the press is supposed to be briefed by what is called an official spokesman, like the Ministry of External Affairs. All matters of external policy initiatives are supposed to be made available to the press only by what is called an official spokesman.
That's exactly the same thing. He says the generals will not be allowed to talk. The official spokesman will be defense PR, which is part of the ministry.
So that is so basically it is for the department.
It's a different name for the same thing.
It is for the department to say that in respect of particular information which is not classified or has to do with information that the public can have. I mean, there is no problem in having it. It is for the department to widen the ambit and to say that they can also make this information available. I would think that.
I mean, the events, sorry for interrupting, but the events in Chadda Sharif are a clear example of how the army finally had to take the blame for events that they were really not entirely responsible for. The control over dealing with the media was with the civilian government, with the state authorities.
But Ashok, wouldn't Chadda Sharif count among the examples all these gentlemen have mentioned, the kind of thing that involves national security?
Why should it? If you are inviting the press, if you are looking for transparency, so what is the problem of bringing them there? You bring them there when it's either too late or too early, and that's precisely what happened in Chadda Sharif. Initially, the media and the press were allowed to go in and meet the people. Then when the firefight started, you clamped down. When the shrine got burned down, you rushed in with fire engines, and they said, well, let's talk now. So Mr. Mastgul disappeared, and the blame fell on the army.
Wait, when you planned Black Thunder, what did you do about this aspect, the transparency, the information aspect?
Well, as you are well aware that the international media was invited and given a vantage position from where they could watch what was happening, because it is not enough just to brief the press, it also must sound credible. You may hand out certain press statements to the press, but what they see or hear from other sources is different, then that credibility is not there. I think in Chadda Sharif perhaps this was one of the wrong things which took place, because by an order the press was removed from that situation. But I think the point which he is making is very valid, and I think what is happening today is that when something good happens, then the senior most functionary of the government is very keen to brief the press, come on television, cameras, everything. But when something wrong happens, then nobody is available, and then the whole exercise is left to some junior official who may make a hash of the things, because he may not be aware of what those facts are, because after all when something bad happens, there are many aspects, and only those people can brief the press who are aware of all the dimensions, all the developments in the thing. And I don't see any reason at all why the army officers should not be allowed to brief the press. In police, there is no difficulty in the police to
do you have a spokesman, or can any DCP speak to
but
press?
Spokesman again is it's a different question, because by tradition civil services, and that is applicable to the armed forces also, they were anonymous. The individual civil servant was supposed to be anonymous. Now that tradition is changing because of various reasons we can't discuss in this short time. But spokesman in every department, there is a spokesman also in the police department. That spokesman is there so that facts are handed over to the media without any particular police officers coming into the picture. But these days again,
Every day you open the newspaper, there's always some ACP, some DCP being quoted. The police department doesn't use the spokesman.
no, but that's what I'm saying. Things have changed.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
No, it's inevitable. It's inevitable. It has changed everywhere in the world, because now the role of the police, and that for matter the civil servant, affects ordinary man in the street.
So is it a good thing?
It's a good thing. It's made accountable.
Is it a good thing?
Yes.
So therefore you're not in favor of the spokesman
Within certain limits. Within certain limits.
You see, ultimately we are talking about everyone being authorized or enabled to communicate information, as much information to the public as possible, and for the ground rules to be laid. Broadly, instead of the catch-all phrase, you say that, like they said, national security and anything that is likely to lead to an arrest or whatever it is. So subject to certain ground rules being laid, everything else should be open. So that secrecy becomes an exception.
Let me see if I can get your position right, Mr. Sundaran. Your position, if I can summarize it, is that officials or civil servants or people who deal with the public should be in a position to answer questions, provide information.
Yes.
That the existing Official Secrets Act makes it difficult for them to do so, and that therefore there should be a new act and new ground rules.
Yes.
Having done that, the spokesman thing is not so important.
Yes.
Because each individual officer must be responsive. Is
That's
that
right.
fair?
That's right.
Mr. Chadda, would you accept that?
No, but actually if everybody is supposed to speak on the same subject, then it will really create to confusion and law and order problem. So I think personally,
Why a law and order problem?
yes,
My
you see,
interest.
no, you see the question is everybody is speaking on the same subject in different tones, and that will create to confusion. Suppose if the police people also, they start speaking about a murder case or a theft or something like that, that you see this once you pass on information from one person to another person, then there is a change in the information being passed on. So if there is one person to speak on behalf of the organization, that would at least give a true picture. At least he would have been.
Let me get this right. Your position is that if a officer investigating a case talks about something, it could lead to a law and order problem. However, if he gives the information to a spokesman, that's okay.
No, because my point is one person would be speaking for the organization, but if 20 persons speak on the same subject, and everybody would be speaking with some, because only one person has the correct information, the others may be.
No, but that is the case for authorizing a person who's concerned and who's responsible to speak, not for having a spokesman. For instance, if there are 20 people doing an investigation, the DCP, who's in charge of all the information, should be the man speaking, rather than the sub-inspector.
Exactly.
That's what you're saying.
Only one person should be authorized to speak on a particular subject that is there.
Would you accept that?
Yeah, I entirely agree with that,
that.
because normally otherwise it will create a lot of confusion if too many people speak on the same subject. But it doesn't mean that, the word spokesman is sometimes related to what he mentioned with a person from the information department.
Right.
But there are times when he is just not competent to understand
The nuances or whatever.
of a situation. But in those situations, it is important that the person who is best informed, and of course he'll be as responsible, if not more responsible than the spokesman, is nominated to brief the media.
You have no problems with that?
I will have no problem, but actually as far as we are discussing only about the information which is already available with us.
The disseminating of that information.
But the question, the larger question is the information which should go to the public about other things.
Excellent.
But I think here the problem as far as the armed forces are concerned, why the spokesman comes in is because, in my judgment, it brings in the element of civilian control once again over the armed forces, and therefore yes, it is true.
It's a different point, though.
Well,
Yes.
I think that's the reason.
Yeah.
If you explore and investigate why this is happening, it is to assert that civilian control. Otherwise, I see no reason why this should not happen. After all, the armed forces are involved morning to night in aid to civil authority. These laws were made for warfare. The rules of warfare have changed. These laws must change also.
Makes sense.
I have got a different
Quickly, because
viewpoint.
we're out of
Yes.
time, yeah.
You see, the question is when armed forces are used for internal security situation. I think it is common sense that you don't want to expose the armed forces to the media glare, which will lead to all sorts of criticism in handling a particular situation. That's not good for the armed forces morale. The police, on the contrary, is able to take all this criticism in its stride, because it is not a organization which is not subjected to this day in day out, but armed forces are not. And internal security situation is very different to in times of war. In times of war, for example, if the army officers brief the press, as a matter of fact they do, and it is very good because it raises the morale.
I see. You accept that distinction.
But wait, we haven't fought a war for 28 years after 71. The point is...
But is the distinction a valid one?
No, the distinction is all right as long as the ground rules are understood. The ground rules are that we are not fighting wars anymore. We are fighting internal wars, and for internal wars, you don't want the rules that were made for external wars.
So therefore,
to
you
apply.
don't accept that. You say that even in internal security,
Absolutely.
the army should not be anonymous. It should be upfront briefing.
Because it must be able to project its own point of view itself, and not through somebody else.
Mr. Sundaram, we seem to have a broad consensus on the issue that responsible officers should speak about issues that they're competent to speak about. We have some difference in the margin about how much the army should be involved in this exercise. What we haven't really discussed is how we should amend the Official Secrets Act, what kind of legislation there should be, and what kind of citizens charter we need. Perhaps we'll do another program next week and we'll come back to those issues if you'd be kind enough to come back.
Sure.
Meanwhile, thank you very much for watching Roundtable.